Hi everybody and welcome back to a new episode of Diagnosedan. Today we are working on a 2006 Saab 9-3 with a 2-liter turbo engine. This car broke down in Belgium, was towed to a shop over there. They diagnosed the car with a bad turbo, replaced the turbo, but on the way back home to Holland, the car broke down again with exactly the same symptoms. So the car was towed into my shop to see what's going on. So let's diagnose this together. Now, when the car broke down the first time, the customer complaint was a lack of power and a lot of noise coming from the turbo area. Now, although the customer told me that the symptoms are exactly the same right now, I want to take a look inside the turbo to see if it really failed again. I removed the intake pipe and that should give us a clear view inside the turbo. Now I want to see if I can bring the camera down there so we can all see if that turbo really failed again. So let's see. I hope you guys can see this. Unfortunately, this turbo failed again, which is a shame because a turbo is a very expensive part. Now, turbos are very reliable and they rarely fail unless they've got very high mileage. Now, this turbo failed on the same day as it was replaced. Now, usually when a turbo fails, this is caused by something external. Now, obviously, we need to replace this turbo again. But before we do that, it's up to us to find out why it failed in the first place. I removed the heat shield so you guys have got a clearer view of the turbo. Now on top of the turbo, we've got the oil feed line that supplies oil to lubricate the turbo. Now this turbo is also water cooled to make it extra reliable. Now lubrication is one of the most important things for a turbo. So when you replace a turbo, always make sure there's sufficient oil flow towards the turbo because without proper lubrication, your turbo won't last very long. In the next step, we're going to check if the turbo is supplied with sufficient oil. Now what I'd normally do is remove the banjo bolt and tie one of these rubber gloves around the oil feed. When I start the car, this glove should fill up with oil within seconds. Now for this video, I'm using one of these transparent zip bags just so you guys can see what's going on inside. Now when I start the car, we should see a steady stream of oil making it into this bag. As you could see, no oil made it to the turbo. This way, we could fit another 10 new turbos, but they would all fail if we don't fix the lubrication problem. Now, there could be many reasons for the oil not making it to the turbo, but the first thing I want to check is if this engine has got sufficient oil pressure. I removed the oil pressure sensor from the right front side of the engine near the oil filter. I hooked up my pressure tester, and in the next step, I'm going to start the car and let it idle while you guys take a look at the screen. I looked into service data and I found out that we're looking for at least 2 bars of pressure at idle. So at least 2 bars is what we're looking for. As you could see, we had about 5 bars of oil pressure, and that should be more than enough to supply the turbo with oil. Now, since this turbo needs to be removed anyway, and to get some more room for testing and do visual inspections, in the next step, I want to remove the turbo. I removed the turbo from the engine and I removed the exhaust side from the turbo, so we have a clear view of the damage that has been done. And just have a look. Unfortunately, the other shop did change the turbo, but they didn't get to the root cause of why it failed. And that's of course the lack of lubrication. Now, modern turbos can easily spin over 200,000 RPM, which is crazy when you compare it to the engines of a Boeing 747, which spin at approximately 7,000 RPM. Now, the vanes on this shaft can reach speeds over 1,300 kilometers per hour, and the air is being sucked into the turbo with speeds close to Mach 1. Now, this all combined with the hot exhaust gases, things can get really violent inside the turbo, and temperatures can easily reach 1,000 degrees Celsius, which is hot enough to melt glass. Now, that's why without the proper lubrication, a turbo won't last very long. Normally, oil travels through this oil feed line into the turbo, and this oil feed line is connected to the side of the engine block. Oil then enters the turbo, lubricates this shaft, and returns into the crankcase through this oil return pipe. Now, on this turbo, they did replace the oil return pipe with a new one, but they didn't replace the oil feed. Now, in the next step, we need to figure out why the oil is not making it into the turbo. We know there's no oil coming out of this side of the oil line, but is there any oil being fed into the line through the engine block? For the next test, I connected a camera to my scan tool and I placed the camera very close to the bore where this line connects to the engine block. When I cranked the car and I made sure it won't run by disconnecting some connectors, we should see oil coming out of the engine block. And if we do see that, we know that at least the oil is making it to this oil line. Now, we clearly saw there was oil coming out of the engine block, but we also know there's no oil coming out of the other side of that oil feed line. So in the next step, we're gonna do a little experiment. I taped a rubber glove to one side of the oil line and I cut a hole in one of the fingers. In the next step, I'm going to tape my smoke machine into that glove, and when I turn the smoke machine on, of course we should see the smoke coming out the other end of the oil line. Now, although there was quite a pressure buildup inside this glove, we saw no smoke coming out the other end of that oil line. So I guess we found why the turbo failed in the first place. We've got a restricted oil feed line. Now, I contacted the company that supplied that Belgium workshop with the turbo, and the sad thing is, they told me that these lines actually come as part of the kit. Now, I did see they replaced the return pipe, but somehow they chose not to replace that oil feed line, although it was part of the kit. And that turned out to be a very costly mistake. In most cases, a turbo fails because of external problems. So if you don't like comebacks or warranty, make sure you do a few checks before you replace the turbo with a new one. Always make sure you've got sufficient oil flow and pressure, making it all the way to the turbo. If this isn't the case, you could have an oil pressure problem or a restriction somewhere. Restrictions can in many cases be avoided by respecting the oil change intervals and by using the right type of oil. Also make sure there are no restrictions in the oil return. If you got a restriction in the oil return, This could affect the flow of oil through the turbo itself. Now also make sure you've got normal crankcase pressure. If the crankcase pressure is too high, this could push against the oil trying to leave the turbo, again affecting the flow of oil. Whatever is causing the high crankcase pressure, a bad PCV system or internal engine wear, always make sure you fix that problem first before replacing the turbo. Always do a visual inspection of the intake system and make sure there are no foreign objects in there that could be sucked into the turbo. In many cases, you can download a checklist from the website of the company that supplied your turbo. Carefully go through all the steps of the checklist. This might take you 15 minutes, but hey, what's 15 minutes on an expensive repair like replacing a turbo? That 15 minutes could have easily saved this one. Now I'm going to order a new turbo and replace that oil feed line. I'm going to go through the checklist, but I'm pretty confident that after replacing that restricted oil feed, the new turbo is going to last longer than a day. Now I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe to my channel. And when you hit the little bell, you will get a notification each time I post a new video. And remember, Diagnosedan, fixed it again. See you next time, guys. As you could see, I couldn't even blow through this line with shop air. So at that point, I got really curious and decided to cut it open to see what's inside. Now what I found is that this line is totally clogged up with carbon deposits. Now if you think you know what's causing this or what we could do to prevent this, please leave a comment in the description box of this video. Making it all the way to the turbo. If this isn't the case, you could have low oil pressure. If you got a restriction in the oil return. In the next step, we're going to check if the turbo is supplied with